Hey everybody, welcome. We're gonna get started. We can invite you in this intimate room to come closer if you'd like. My name is Debbie and I am proud to be hosting this conversation on behalf of an organization called WhyHunger that has been working to end hunger and the injustice at its root for the last 50 years. And we were founded on the fundamental belief that hunger is solvable and nutritious food is a basic human right. So WhyHunger works with community-based organizations, grassroots leaders, global social movements, here in the US and in 23 countries across the globe. We resource, connect, and amplify their local solutions that are feeding communities, nourishing our planet, transforming our food system, and advancing food sovereignty for us all. WhyHunger was founded by artist-activist Terry Chapin, and he believed we all had the power to do something, and that music, art, and culture had a role in fueling social change. We work with all kinds of musicians for decades, like Bruce Springsteen, Yoko Ono Lennon, Tom Morello, Seema Funk, Grace Bowers, to raise funds and awareness. And we use that celebrity spotlight to really center the voices, experience, and wisdom, and the leadership of communities that have the most at stake. Now more than ever, we need to invest in and follow the lead of our BIPOC communities, our farmer and farm worker communities, our immigrant communities, our rural and low-income communities. Because those are the folks that know the solutions to end hunger. And they're actually doing it in communities around the globe. And that is really key to building the just, hunger-free world that we all want to live in. We're very lucky today to have two of these leaders with us, my colleagues and friends in this work, Kristen and Rosalinda, to share their wisdom. Today they're gonna tell us about their work. They're gonna talk about why scaling agroecology and advancing food sovereignty is critical to building this just, hunger-free world. And they're gonna make sure that you walk away with some concrete steps you can take to find your something that you can do to be part of the solution. And now I want to talk about who's on the stage. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Kristen, and then Rosalinda, to tell us who you're representing and ground us in where we are. Kristen, if you can go first.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. My name's Kristen, Natessa Kristen. I am Nipmuc. We come from a small tribal community in central Massachusetts. My grandmother married into the Mashpee Wampanoag community, so I was also raised biculturally. We're right outside of Boston. Nipmuc means freshwater people, and so I'm literally named after the waterways that I'm born into. And I'm a mom of many things. I'm a producer, so I grow food, but I also have two daughters who should be arriving very shortly into this space. I grow corn. I grow a flint corn that was reclaimed through agroecology. My daughters also grow the corn, and we're just learning the nixtamalization process so that we can make hominy and make really nutritious food to share with our community. I also grow a variety of other crops, my favorite being potatoes. I'm a pretty successful potato farmer and make really good potato chips. And I process fish, so I come from a family of fisher folk and hunters. And yeah, I remember last year around this time, maybe in a month or so, I was like slaying maybe 50 fish in like 1 week while also trying to get the fields ready. But I also work full time because most of us producers really have a hard time making a livelihood out of it. And since my early 20s, just being in a marginalized community with little access to resources, by default I entered the nonprofit sector, and so I've been pretty much a community organizer for over 20 years and familiar with the nonprofit sector, so I work full time for WhyHunger as well. I do their global movements program work, and I have the privilege of being able to learn from small-scale producers all over the globe, Indigenous folks, Black folks, peasant farmers, and I get the privilege of helping to mobilize resources to support their work on the front lines. But I'm also co-founder of Woodlands Rematriation. It's pretty long-winded. Basically, we're woodland people I'm wearing this skirt today to just show, like I said, I come from the waterways here, and I'm also a paddler. Our waterways are like our traditional highways, and this skirt represents the green, the earth, our plants. The purple is from our quahog shells. So I make quahog jewelry, or what's known as wampum. And my teacher always told me that this is what fed my ancestors for thousands of years. But we create beautiful artwork out of it. And really, as woodland people, we know that our trade routes are very deep. That's how we gained corn in our area. Traditionally, we didn't have agriculture where I'm from, and as climate changed, we adapted and we traded and practiced diplomacy with many other nations, extending throughout the Americas. And so Eastern Woodlands Rematriation is really trying to reclaim our way of building a trade system, a barter system, a food system that's more equitable and just and in line with our cultural traditions.
Thank you, Kristen.
Rosalinda?
So my name is Rosalinda Guillen. I am a farm worker from Northwest Washington State, close to the border, very close to the border actually, in Whatcom and Skagit County. So I am from a family of migrant workers that have been migrating. My father and my grandparents migrated across the United States, working in the fields from Northeast New York, across the country through Wisconsin and Minnesota, Wyoming, California, harvesting crops. So I am the daughter of a professional migrant farm worker. I grew up in part of my life in Mexico and part of my life in Texas, actually, which is what I wanted to mention today, that you know, being here in Austin is like being in my native territory of Mexico. This was northern Mexico. This is land that was taken from us, which began the whole migrant farm worker tradition, if you could call it that. And I would just like to mention that even in this block, there's a little art gallery called La Peña from Cynthia Perez, who founded it, and to try to keep in place our tradition, our art, and who we are as a Mexican people in a conquered land, which is what we consider Texas, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and even parts of Wyoming, Colorado. This was our land. But because of that, my tradition with my family is farm workers, which is similar to the landless workers of Brazil. We are a landless population now. And so I come to you as a farm worker in the United States and founder of an organization called Community to Community Development. I have been a community organizer and a labor organizer since 1986. I was politicized by the Rainbow Coalition in this country, trying to elect Jesse Jackson way back in the day in the 1980s. And through that politicization, I learned about the history of us as Mexican people and our solidarity with other people of color, Native peoples, and African Americans in the United States. De Comunidad a Comunidad, or Community to Community, is a farm worker-led organization that works with farm workers, migrant farm workers, local farm workers that have settled in different areas, and also, of course, a lot of immigrant families. We are in our 21st year of organizing, and I would like to thank organizations such as, and foundations and groups such as WhyHunger for giving us a space and the opportunity to bring our message to places like this, like the South by Southwest conference, festival, whatever it is. It looks like more like a technology place where nobody would ever think of a migrant farm worker, because I have seen very few actually in this group. But first and foremost, I am an organizer from a migrant farm worker background. I am a Mexican American who lives in this country and also works with a lot of my brothers and sisters from Mexico. We organize in you know, the Northwest region and sometimes even down into California for, how do I put this, to try to develop food systems that recognize our presence, food systems that place us within the map of food production, food consuming, and also health, and justice in general. So food sovereignty for us is very important. It's a founding foundation of our organization, as well as we're also women-led. And I'd like to just mention that being here today is important because we all eat, and because you need to know that there is a population that without this population, our food system would be in very bad shape. So thank you for having us here. Thank you, WhyHunger, for creating the space. And I look forward to the rest of the panel.
Thank you both so much. I want to start with you, Rosalinda. You've been doing this work, organizing, shaping policy, engaging with communities and movements for decades. Can you share with us what food sovereignty, what that vision of food sovereignty looks like to you, what that means to you?
I will, and I want to start by saying that, you know, my trajectory, I guess you could say, or my road in organizing began with the basics of, as a farm worker, working in the fields, understanding just what the basic rights for us are as we work the land, as we work in the fields, and that the unfairness of it all, and understanding how are we going to survive that, moving forward to learning from the Rainbow Coalition organizers about the systemic way that we were placed in this country as this very low-wage labor force for corporate agriculture, and how we participated. We were participants, unwilling participants, if I may say, in the creation of power, both political power and economic power of the agricultural industry. And then learning and understanding that our role in producing food on the land, because I am a farm worker that works outside on the land, in that participation of corporate agriculture, in trying to understand how we deal with the damage that we as farm workers know we're doing to the land in the way that we're being forced to participate in production. The toxins that are being used that are poisoning the soil, the air, and the water. And then moving forward to understanding even more the structure of these systems and our role as farm workers in that system, and the impact that it has on our health as we're producing, but then the impact that it has on consumers. And ultimately, as I get older and I do the political work and the organizing, it really, food sovereignty to us is the ability to be able to understand and to know that the system that we're working in is flawed, and it's dangerous, and it's not sustainable. And as long as we're able to work and be a disposable workforce, the system will keep producing food that we know ultimately, because as soon as chemicals and toxins were being used, we know it is also hurting you that are eating that food. And so food sovereignty for us is that moment when we know that the food that's being produced by us is not killing us by working us to death or by poisoning us with toxins as we're working, but then we also know that you are eating healthy food that we produced. And my father, who is a farm worker, told us when we were young, working in the fields, I started working in the fields at 10, that regardless of how difficult the work was, that there was beauty all around us on the land, in the rising of the sun, in the flowing of the breeze as we were working outside, in the smelling of the soil in the early morning when we went in to work in the fields, that there was beauty in that. And it was hard work, but we were doing something that was very important to other people, that we were producing food that was good for people to eat. But I began to understand also that we really are not. And food sovereignty is when we reach that moment when what my father told us actually is real. That we are producing healthy food, and that we are also enjoying that food with the people that are eating it, and knowing that it is healthy, and that it's being produced locally for people that can actually get it as fresh and as clean as they can at the local level. And after many years of thinking about this, all of us as farm worker leadership understand The food sovereignty for us is that moment when you can sit at your table, look at the food on your plate, and know with a certainty that everything that's on your plate was produced without harming the land, without harming another human being, and without damaging or harming an innocent creature that actually gave its life so we can have nutrition. That to me is food sovereignty. And you're also eating the food that you want to eat. Your culturally appropriate food, the food that makes you feel human and alive and vital. That is food sovereignty. And I guess the work in organizing it is what's it going to take so that we all can have that plate of food on our table.
Thank you, Rosalinda. That's a beautiful description of what we're all striving for here. Kristen, the next question's for you. There's a lot of terms out there around sustainable agriculture, climate smart agriculture, regenerative ag, certified organic. It's hard to know what they all mean. Can you tell us what is agroecology and how it's different from some of those other terms?
Yeah, I would say agroecology extends from essentially what Rosalinda was explaining as food sovereignty, and I think it comes down to care and love and relationship. So first and foremost, when we're thinking about these different terms, we can get organic anywhere, right? But agroecology is really rooted in a traditional, it borrows traditional knowledge and blends it with modern scientific research knowledge, data, practices. And that traditional knowledge really extends from these long-term relationships. So it has to include knowledge that's transcended over years from practitioner to practitioner, a long-term knowledge in the land base. So when we say agroecology, we're not talking about just something that's climate smart. While agroecology is climate smart, we're not just talking about organic carrots. We're talking about really respecting, as Rosalinda was explaining in this vision for food sovereignty, all of the beings and all of the creatures that give its life so that we can have. This is really rooted in traditional knowledge and in cosmovisions of Indigenous peoples and why these practices were and are struggled for in all of this time. And when you look at the world over and you learn about the cosmovisions of Indigenous peoples who have worked the land since time immemorial, you realize that it is very much a humbled practice that puts priority into the ecosystem services and ensures that the whole community is able to thrive and survive. So it's not individualistic either. And I think sometimes we can get tripped up on these terms, this terminology of organic, climate smart, regenerative ag, and then we can start to dig in and see who's practicing that, who grew these organic carrots and what sort of folks are practicing this climate smart growing. And if we're thinking about large industry whose primary purpose is to just gain a profit, we can distinguish that from agroecology. Agroecology, again, is very much a relationship. It's why we will be proud of what the food that's sitting in front of us and feel that nourishment and feel that love and know who grew it. That's what agroecology is. And it's also political. So I've learned in my training that agroecology is three things. It's technical, it's political, and it's cultural. And anyone can say they're practicing agroecology, but if it's not rooted in the long-term knowledge of peasant folks, Indigenous folks, Black agrarian folks, folks who have transcended this knowledge through struggle from year to year, if it's not rooted in that, it's not agroecology. So we have a lot of co-optation of the term agroecology these days, where university may claim it. It's sexy in that way, and so we'll find that a lot of folks will utilize that, just like green, climate smart, regenerative. These are buzzwords that make people feel good. But you really have to think about who the producer is and where it's coming from and what those relationships are. Most often there's stories tied to that. There's stories tied to the land. And that's what agroecology is.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Can you talk a little bit about agroecology as it relates to climate justice and how it's connected with climate change?
The exciting thing about agroecology is that it's diversified, and I think that's essential. We know that things like monocropping, low input or synthetic pesticides are harming us and are damaging the landscape, right? And so agroecology really focuses on how we take care of the ecosystem. So I can give an example. I grow our corn, it's no-till. We know that by a lack of tilling, we're actually preserving water, moisture content. We're also mitigating any sort of invasives and being able to grow there. Better soil nutrition. This is all helpful, right, in being climate resilient because we know that our landscape is changing. And so when we're going through these abrupt kind of weather changes of extreme periods of drought, lots of rain, we know that through no-till, we're actually preserving the soil quality. And yeah, I'd say that's a good example.
Thank you, Kristen. Now, some of the questions that we get when we talk about agroecology is people say, like, that sounds beautiful, Rosalinda, that's a beautiful vision, Kristen, how aspirational, but is it scalable? Can this actually work to feed the world? So Kristen, I'd love to hear from you first, and there's a little bit of time, Rosalinda, if you want to chime in too on this. What's the response to that? Can we actually scale agroecology?
I think there's a lot of research that backs that it is scalable. Even large industry can adapt things like agroforestry, crop diversification, all sorts of examples that exist that it can be scalable, but research also shows that with proper management, you can actually have high yields in crops. So planting corn, beans, and squash together over time will actually give you a higher yield than simple monocropping of the same crop in the same place time and time again, which is another example of how it is climate resilient practices because it's essentially not damaging the soil type. It's giving spaces enough time to regenerate itself. It's really working with natural systems. I feel like this is very basic, but it's crazy that we have to explain these things. And yeah, I come from a people that we knew the land would change. Literally our languages, sometimes the soil, a name of a place could be where the soil's no longer good, right? I mean, how ingenious is that to like name that place so that the up and coming generations or even just the next decade, they might realize this is not really where I want to put my farm or start to plant, right? Like we know that nature is not static, that it's always changing. And so the idea of just being in one place, consistently doing the same thing over and over and over again is going to deplete the soil quality. And yeah, I forgot what the question was, but hopefully I answered it.
The whole idea of scalability has always been something that as farm workers, we've actually lived through that whole version of mono-agriculture. And as farm workers, we've worked for these industrial mono-agricultural companies where you've got thousands and thousands of acres of carrots. You got thousands and thousands of acres of potatoes and other just a single product that we're working in. And those single products, because of the way they're being farmed, require, they call it amendments to the soil, right? Farm workers talk about medicina, because that's what they're told. Esto es medicina para que crezca mejor. This is medicine for the soil so the food will grow better. I mean, there's all kinds of language being used to try to justify the scalability of these mono-agricultural productions, when we as farm workers know that is just not true, because we're seeing as we work, the damage that is being caused. The idea of these organophosphates that are being put in soil that kill literally every single living creature in the soil that has any kind of a nervous system instantly dies when these chemicals are put into the soil. As farm workers, we know that's not a good thing. The soil needs these little creatures to keep it rich and to keep it safe and healthy for food production. So for us, when you talk about scalability, it's like that is a question that it really requires so much more political action, but also the relationship building that Kristen was talking about. Because ultimately, it's about what the consumer demands in this country. The eaters, right, that demand avocados at Christmas time in a place where avocados can't grow, et cetera, you know, because you're the ones that shop and go buy this stuff. So that's the relationship, I think, with agroecology and food sovereignty that we want to talk to you about. Because we are, I am a representative and a voice for millions of farm workers in this country that have seen over the last few centuries, the last few decades, or maybe more, since the 1970s, when chemicals first started to get used, and Cesar Chavez warned you, consumers, this is not good what they're starting to do in the Central Valley of California with these chemicals, because we were dying. And I'm reminded when I came to Austin that right a few blocks away is, you know, Cesar Chavez Avenue. My hero, my mentor, who I never actually met, but who I have learned from because of his work that is still alive through me and other farm workers, is right down the street, watching me speak to you about my people in this country and what we have contributed. And some of that contribution is not good because we have been, like I said before, forced to work in this mono-agricultural production. At the same time, in counties such as mine, in Skagit County, there is a small farming system that we work for small farmers, small family farmers, side by side, who don't believe in the mono-agricultural production. So we know that there is a way to scale intelligently to both support and keep the soil healthy, in produce enough for people to eat and have it in a very diversified products in one county. But for us, most importantly, is the best employers for farm workers are the small producer. Because in that small production environment, there's more of a partnership that's born. And when you're talking about undocumented, most of the farm workers in this country are undocumented. They are not, they're immigrants into this country. But what we have done in rural America with immigrant farm workers, together with the small family farming system, and many small mayors and local economies, there has been like what I call like a moral partnership, like an understanding in a community of who's living there and who is doing what. And this is like a moral contract that we have come into by culture, by understanding, by having this relationship with the land and the production of food at the local area. And that is being broken right now. It's a moral contract that we have entered into by action, by being together in the production of food in rural America that right now is in danger. So scalability is possible, and it is happening in many areas with small farming systems. And additionally, what we're doing in our organization is organizing and developing farm worker-owned farming cooperatives, so that the cooperative model in local rural America is possible to build a scalable, small, healthy farming system that not only supports workers and consumers, but local economies. Because it's survivable. As we learned during the pandemic, many areas in this country did not have the ability to feed themselves because of the scalability of the modern agricultural production right now, of mono-agriculture in many areas. So those are just some of my thoughts when you talk about scalability and how that we believe it's totally possible if we're willing to do it.
Thank you for that, Rosalinda. And we're seeing those types of local, regional food and farm economies working all around the globe, not just in Washington State, not just here in the US, but creating the political will, the narrative, the organizing for those spaces to come to fruition. We're seeing it. It's not just this idea in the future. So what does all this have to do with food security? Rosalinda, I want to hear from you first, and Kristen, there's time if you want to chime in. What does it have to do with food security, and why is it so important right now?
So I want to talk to you about that. I believe in the current political environment, and with the thinking about profitability and tariffs and all of this discussion that's going on in this country today, that a lot of the imports of food, importing food from Mexico and other countries, because of what the consumer is demanding in this country, that when we're talking about food security, we're in a very critical moment right now of what food security is going to look like in the next 4 to 10 years in this country. And I'm coming and speaking to you as a farm worker, because we are the labor force on the ground, outside labor force, but it's not just us. You're talking about all of the meat cutters in the meat industries, right? The poultry and the beef, the packaging and the putting together of, preparing food to be shipped hundreds and thousands of miles away so it can arrive to you fresh. All of this system that we have created in this country of getting food to the consumer. We're in a critical moment when you're talking about the labor force in the food system, all up and down the food chain. The ability for workers who work in the food system to be able to continue to do that work. Nothing hurts me more than when you walk into a grocery store and you see, food wrapped in plastic. I mean, fresh product that should be fresh, wrapped in individually wrapped apples or other product that is just like, it is so wrong to be able to receive food that way, but we are demanding it. So I think in this moment right now, if we care about healthy eating, if we care about having fresh food for our children in the near future, we're at a pivotal moment of both relationship building, but also political action, and what are we going to do to ensure that this country has a healthy food system in the future. And some of that is challenging. And so I am a migrant farm worker telling you that I would like to have that conversation with farmers. I would like to have that conversation with consumers about how do we see our food, where do we see our food coming from, and what kind of food do we want to eat, do we want to feed our family. Food sovereignty at this point seems like a long way down the future. And I feel like right now, this is a time to talk about how are we just going to eat well now. And I think that there are decisions being made that are affecting that. I don't know if this is where, you want me to talk about H2A or?
Yeah, you could get into it.
I mean, I think this is like one of the, did you want to say something right now? So we are, I have to bring it forth because, as I said, such a large percentage of farm workers are undocumented. And let me not even go back to the beginning of the whole thing that I have learned, which I didn't know, that agriculture in this country was founded on slavery. That is something that we live with every day now. Those of us farm workers that are organizing and understand. Agriculture was founded on slavery in this country. And it has been my experience with my family and with my colleagues my age, that we have finally understood that for generations, my family was poor because by design. Because the agricultural industry really, in my opinion, has been wanting a slave labor force. Because that is how it started. That is my opinion as a migrant farm worker in this nation. And now, because of that, a lot of Mexican Americans that grew up being the migrant labor force in this country for generations We're not enough to keep up with the mono-agricultural industrial production in this nation. So immigrants came in and filled some of that job need, labor need, right? And it was allowed. It was another one of those contracts, kind of social contracts in rural America where you didn't ask somebody if their social security number was good or not. You just accepted it and you hired them and they worked. That is a social contract that we all accepted in this nation. And now, because of that, we are being, a lot of my community is being criminalized because all of a sudden, we're no longer essential. The pandemic's over, we're no longer essential. Now we're criminals. And this detention plan is affecting your food security. Not just my people and the pain and the hurt of families across America, but your food security is in danger now. So this is like another social contract that we have with you. It's like you eat the food that we produce, some of it under very dangerous conditions. And so in this country, beginning with the Bracero program, there's an H2A, and I want to get I don't know, how many of you know about the H2A program in this country? So the H2A program is a federal program that requires a contract between the Department of Labor and Homeland Security to provide temporary visas to farm workers that work in agriculture. And this is a program that has existed since the 1940s and 50s, and it's still in place. And this program and I'm gonna quote the growers that use it, because it's mostly corporate agricultural producers that use this program, because it's an expensive program. It's expensive to import farm workers, okay? It's highly regulated by the federal government. This is what the industry says. What they don't say is that it's unenforced regulation. And farm workers die that are being shipped in from Mexico. They die. One died in my community, in my backyard, in my organizing area where, we organize for justice for farm workers. Before a corporate employer can bring in H2A workers, they must prove that there is a labor shortage. There is no process to prove there's a labor shortage. I mean, it's just that this whole thing is ridiculous. In my state, in Washington State, where I do my organizing, we have been opposed to the H2A program since the Bracero program. Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta opposed the Bracero program in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Then it flipped over to the H2A program. So we have done organizing against the importation of a labor force, because when these H2A workers arrive, they have no rights. They don't have the right to organize. They don't have the right to complain. There is a complaint system that's unenforced and nobody listens to. Farm workers die in the H2A program all the time in this country. In my state, in 2024, there were 32,000 farm workers shipped into Washington State, displacing local farm workers that have been supporting their families in agriculture for decades. There is projected 35,000 farm workers, H2A workers, to be brought into Washington State. I come to you to tell you that I believe that in Project 25, the H2A program is mentioned, and so is immigration reform. I believe that there is the plan to detain and deport Mexican immigrants, which are mostly agricultural workers, to then flip it around and bring in an imported quasi-slave labor force to produce your food, to grow your food. And they are being brought in, they will be brought into the meatpacking places, the big egg corporations that are growing eggs. And this is in process now. And we have spoken to the agricultural leaders, to political leaders, and this H2A program is now coming up. You are hearing it being mentioned by the current administration. So we are worried not just for the farm worker families that are already in this country with children born here that are US citizens, but also for our food security. It will impact everybody in one way or another. And I will not eat food that is produced by a quasi-slave labor force in this country, and you shouldn't either. And if we allow this to happen, that is what's going to be happening to our food system. In 2019, there was an attempt to pass the Agricultural Modernization Act, and we beat that back. But many components of that Modernization Act is now in Project 2025. So in these small towns, you know, in rural America, in Washington State, the apple industry now, the 30 to 35,000 farm workers in Washington State are mostly working in the tree fruit industry with the famous Washington State apple and pears and all the other tree fruit. But it's moving into other areas, especially in small rural Washington State. This program is being marketed by farm labor contractors who earn a lot of money to help the farmers fill out the applications, the federal applications to bring in H-2A workers. So you get all the way the conversation of, you know, liberated farm workers like myself, who in Washington State, we supported the organization of an independent farm worker union called Familias Unidas por la Justicia, which has the highest collective bargaining unit in Washington State, with over 800 indigenous farm workers from Oaxaca and Guerrero picking blueberries and strawberries and blackberries in Washington State under a union contract, earning close to $35 to $37 an hour for a company that has no labor shortage and is succeeding financially because they have a stable, skilled workforce. And now we have this attempt to remove all this skilled workforce from the United States in agriculture and bring in an imported workforce without the same skills that the farm workers that are already here. So where is the food security issue? And where does food sovereignty then fit into this beautiful, you know, vision that we have as farm workers to be your partners, to be your neighbors, to be your fellow Americans producing healthy food? It is a difficult moment right now, and I want to tell you it's a pivotal moment, and that's why I'm here, all the way from Washington State to the South by Southwest concert, or whatever it is, festival, to try to talk to consumers. And I'm seeing a lot of people, you know, a lot of food discussion. But if you're not talking about workers and labor and how the food is going to be produced and packaged and shipped to you, it's a pretty shallow discussion about food.
Thank you so much for that, Rosalinda. I want to turn it over to the Q&A, but first and quickly, I'd like you both to share at least one thing that the folks in this room can do, one action, one step they can take to help support this movement and the vision you're talking about. Kristen, I'll have you go first, and then Rosalinda, and then we'll open up for questions.
Need I say more? I feel like this should be a pop quiz for all of you. Hopefully you picked up on that in what Rosalinda is sharing. But yeah, asking questions like, where is your food coming from? Where is your access to local cooperatives? We really need everybody to double down on your choice as a consumer and where you're getting your food from. And it may be a little bit more expensive. You may have to look a little bit harder, or create that drive, or go without the avocados certain times of year, just like I've learned about the issues with Driscoll and have chosen to go without strawberries when we really want strawberries. That's one thing that you can do. Figuring out ways to organize for good policy. The question of food security is really interesting in my context in the Northeast, where a lot of my tribal kin have been displaced from growing food ourselves. We've intentionally were displaced from that practice during settlement, and a lot of us aren't practitioners anymore. We were able to benefit from the local food purchase assistance program, which was a USDA policy that we were able to get through the state of Massachusetts, and it was really about how our food economies traditionally ran. You know, we were able to have purchasing power to purchase from local small-scale producers, and then what we needed to do with that, we had to spend over 51% on purchasing from local producers, and then we were able to share it with our communities. That is essentially how our traditional food economies worked. So it was pretty strange to me to have to apply through the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, who was the one that actually, like, in our petitions, in our government documents, very clearly disconnected us violently from those foodways, but then we had to go and apply and explain how we were socially disadvantaged and how we would basically adhere to this process. And I'm like, this is our way of growing food, but it was essential. We had hunters and fisher folks who were able to have a good salary that year because we had purchasing power, and you know, the families really benefited from it. They're so conditioned to go to the grocery store to get this industry food and didn't realize, no, actually, we can pay auntie and cousin to go and harvest those berries, and we can bring that back to you.
I mean, for me, it's critical that each and every one of you, wherever you live, that you try to find your farmers, your local farmers, and you talk to them about what is their labor force, who are they, who's working for them, and do they need more workers? Even if they don't know about it, educate yourself on the H2A program. There are many places where you can go, including there's a report by the Southern Poverty Law Center, and there's many reports on the H2A program. Tell your farmers, please do not stoop that low to import farm workers. First, support your local community. I frankly think it's unpatriotic to not support your local economy by hiring your local workers in general, right? An H2A worker, his paycheck goes back to the country he came from. A local worker will spend his money in the community. This is like an economic issue. And I think, you know, when you're talking about scalable, I believe that we can make anything scalable if we all work together in figuring it out. I just don't believe there's anything impossible that we can't do together. So for me, what's most important is that you educate yourself on this H2A program in your food systems at the local level, and then reach out and try to figure out, what can I do? What's happening in my own community in agriculture?
Thank you, Rosalinda. We're going to open it up for questions, so if you want to get us started, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your insights. I'm not so much aware about what was happening in the US and all the injustice that came in. I think I knew maybe 50% of that, and I see all the bitterness you have. And actually, I have two questions. One, why you're still a US citizen with all that history, and the other one relates more to my context. I come from Germany. I support a local farmer, so they are distributing a basket every Friday. And the biggest problem with them is to distribute. So they serve about 500 customers, and they don't have a supermarket. So they have to organize themselves, they need rooms locally, and this kills the whole system, the logistics. And do you have some good practice to overcome that problem? Because we basically, we have to probably shut it down this year because of that.
I know in our area, one of the things that we've actually managed to do the political work in Whatcom County where we're at, in putting together a food systems plan, which addresses all of these, you know, areas of a food system, like what you're talking about with distribution. In our area, one of the things that we've done, and I don't know if you do this in your area, but we've got small farmers actually developing food hubs in certain locations. And these food hubs are places where producers can go and take their product, and then they share in the cost of shipping food as far as they can get it while the food is still healthy, like into the city and all of that. So I know it's not perfect, but I also know that in our food systems plan, part of the implementation of that plan is to work with consumers, local organizations and others in that community, again, to evolve into what is the best way to have a food system that we know is going to sustain us during climate crisis and pandemics and such. So in our community, we're trying to figure it out. I guess what I'm saying is that if we want to, we can figure it out. The thing is surmounting the external pressures of a system that is demanding that we behave in a certain way. And I think that is the challenge that we all have to deal with. And I believe it's possible. I mean, you just, my community, the farm workers I work with are visionaries. They have ideas of how they can work together. And it's like, we just need the resources and the local leaders to listen to us and actually look at the possibilities.
Thanks, Rosalinda. Next question. Hello.
My name is Marit. I'm from Norway, and I want to talk a little bit, or ask you a little bit, question about talk about the consumer and the community. I'm a teacher for teachers, with teaching.
She can't hear you, so could you talk closer to the microphone?
I'm too tall for it.
Yeah, you are. I'm too short.
And I teach teachers that teach children about sustainability. And I've also been listening a lot to the different talks, and especially about sustainability and food, and about all the bills that are being passed. And I want to know, how are you working with the knowledge that is lost, I think, for a whole generation, how to actually make food, because if you make your own soil, your own food, then you wouldn't pass laws that kind of suck.
Yeah, I think it's super appropriate because I have my girls in the room. Just like a week ago when I was tapping one of our maple trees, my daughter, my 9-year-old, said the dandelions are going to be growing soon. And that was an indicator. I didn't realize what she was articulating to me. She was teaching me at the time that that's the indicator of everything else that's to come during the growing season. My oldest daughter goes to an agricultural school, a vocational school, that's public school in our state, so we're very fortunate to have those vocational alternatives to teach. But in Eastern Woodlands Rematriation, we really emphasize the fact that the learning, and agroecology is founded on this too, the whole methodology of agroecology is horizontal learning. It really pushes against this idea of the teacher at the front of the room just kind of importing knowledge for people to just absorb. It's very relational and practical and reciprocal in that way. We can't do any of this, you're right. Like this, it was part of my introduction that I missed that I was gonna say, I'm a teacher, but I'm also learning our young people teach us too. And this is all for nothing if we're not making sure that our generational youth are coming up with this knowledge and able to interact and share and be proud that they're actually teaching us too. It's why I travel with my girls mostly every time that I can, because they're being exposed to this work.
Thanks, Kristen. You get to be our last question.
Another question from a foreigner. Thanks for being here and sharing everything. Gracias por tu conocimiento, Rosalinda. I'm a recent Boston transplant. I've just moved here, and I'm looking forward to getting connected to everything that's happening here on Turtle Island. And so as you're speaking about cosmovision and ancient knowledge systems and pattern recognition and all these wonderful things, you demonstrated with your ribbon skirt that there's story there. What role do you see story playing in this? It's a big question, but what role do you see story?
I just wanted to mention before this panel ended that in our area we work with the Salish people, and the work that they're doing on the ocean side of creating, clam farms and seaweed farms and going back to gathering, that we as farm workers in some of that area, we work together because this whole thing you were talking about, the fish, that there's actually a group of people in Whatcom County that are scaling up the use of, fish and seafood components, leftover components that can be used to fertilize. And we're actually fortunate enough in our cooperative farm, we actually have 60 acres of a farm worker owned farm that we're looking at these traditional methods and trying to work together to acclimatize and to learn how to work the soil, you know, with native peoples, and also traditional Mexican ways of producing food, because we have to learn how to live here, how to live in the climate that we're in now. So I think that I feel like for migrant farm workers, we're building that story. We're continually building that story, and it's evolving, and it has to evolve. Nothing can ever remain static. Only certain components are very important to not lose. And I would just like to say, what can I say? To my mentor, Caesar, we're doing our best.
Thank you all so much for being here for this open conversation, for bearing witness, for being part of this story. And ending on story is so beautiful because it is how we make meaning in the world. And part of this work, there is the technical work that Kristen and Rosalinda are doing, the organizing, there's what our grassroots partners are doing around the globe, but shifting the narrative, and you can be part of that as well. Changing the narrative creates the conditions for our organizing movements to succeed, and you're all part of that story now, so thank you for your time. Huge thank you to Kristen and Rosalinda. We'll be here if you have any questions, and we appreciate you.
And it's very simple. H2A is not okay. Stop it wherever you see it.